netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman.
Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, October 19th, 2020. 1920. That's nice. Okay. What did I say? Tomorrow will be 10/20/20. Okay. So 10/10/2020. 10/20/2020. I can't even tell you what the date would be tomorrow. That's too far in advance. I can't think out that far. Okay. Just so we have things straight here. Ooh, look at this. Some exciting news has come across my desk. It has nothing to do with anything, but why not start with the lighthearted? Today, looks like a good... where can I get this? This is not news unless you can tell me where I get it. Maple rye pecan ice cream. Look at that. Coming from the Twitter account of Ice Cream Jubilee, which is not an account I follow typically, but it was forwarded to me, I guess, by, I do follow the Twitter feed of Catoctin Creek, a local distillery here that makes an excellent rye, and I've always been a fan of. And why would I follow that Twitter account? I don't know. I thought maybe they would give me a drink through the computer, but it hasn't happened so far. But at any rate, now I've learned about Ice Cream Jubilee. Imaginative ice cream flavors in Washington, D.C. Okay, so maybe I'll be able to find my way there and get some of this maple rye pecan, or pecan for some of you. Sounds pretty good. I mean, usually butter goes with the pecans in the ice cream flavor, but hey, maple, great. That's Canadian. They have a little Canadian maple leaf there. Rye, that would be Virginian rye, I guess. Although Canadian whiskey is rye as well, so I don't know. But if it's made here in Washington, D.C., maybe the idea is it's made with the local Catoctin Creek rye. Sounds fantastic. Let's go get it. Ice Cream Jubilee. You'd think we were being paid by these guys. But anyway, that's as good as news, a bit of news as I can start with. Honestly, nothing else could likely at this point be more welcome and yet more relevant to your life than this. However, the theme of the show usually is we read the news to you about stuff, and as depressing as that can be, I feel like we do have an obligation to go forward with that. But before we do, Bill has started us off with a morning tweet, and it being Monday. What better time, really? The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. That's the message carried by the tweet, and of course by the fact that we're here on live now. If you don't listen to me, this is a quote from me. If you don't listen to me, I may not come back. I may not come back. No, I may not come back. Believe me, it's terrible. I get the idea this is actually a quote from Donald Trump. You may never see me again. Yeah, I guess Trump doing what others have described fairly accurately, I am hoping, as his farewell tour. It doesn't have anything to do with his campaign for re-election for president. If it did, he'd go to states where he could have an impact on the vote. But hey, maybe there are lots of places where you can't have much impact on the vote these days, as people have been voting early. It's time for us to take off and vote early. See you later. Bye. The local more local early voting station is now open. I kept mistaking what the date was, but it's open now, and 9 to 5 or so, more or less, maybe 8 to 5 here in our neighborhood. And so, well, let's see. They've got some weird hours. They switch back and forth. On Tuesdays, they open late but stay later till 8, so there's really no excuse. Let's try and make it this weekend. If you've got a similar arrangement, try and make it to the polls, cast those votes, get it done. You never know what can happen between now and then. We're not the only ones out there hoping for black swan events. So, let's vote before one happens to you, I guess. All right. A good message. They do say, you got to make a plan to vote. Now, I've never really felt that way necessarily. I don't contradict the message, but I never felt like I needed a plan to vote. My plan is election day comes, and then I will go to the place where we vote, and I'll vote. And it's never been an issue, never posed a problem. So, I didn't really have to make much of a plan. My plan was to follow the regular plan. This year, I feel like more planning is necessary, and that voting ahead of time is more necessary than ever. I just read a story and didn't put it aside anywhere, but it reminds me of a story I saw of a man in Michigan facing terminal cancer who was determined to stay alive long enough, essentially, to vote against Donald Trump in the presidential election. And he did so, but under an unfortunate quirk of Michigan law, I guess his vote won't be counted. He lived long enough to cast an absentee ballot and then died. And apparently Michigan law is that since the ballots aren't processed until Election Day, when it comes time to open up his ballot, he'll have been dead for a few days or weeks at least. And I guess under Michigan law, they throw that ballot out, which to me doesn't make any sense. I mean, if you went to the polls and cast your vote in person, and then, I mean, if you're hit by a bus on the way home, look both ways before crossing the street, but would they go back? Well, take one of these votes out. This guy voted at this polling location. It doesn't count anymore. He's dead. I guess it's easier to track with absentee ballots, and so therefore I guess doable, whereas the other one's really not doable. But I don't understand why you would do it at all. At the time that vote was cast, it was a valid vote, and I mean, one thing, I don't know, they should go to court with this one, because on the one hand, you could argue, well, we don't process ballots until Election Day. That's true. But and not only at the time the vote was cast, the vote was valid, and at the time it landed on our desk here on Election Day, for all we know, since you can't process it before Election Day, how do we, on what point do we get notice of this person's death? Why is it that we can process everything else having to do with the voter registration up until the moment of, opening these ballots late on Election Day evening, and then the news comes in? I think, all news about the voters should be frozen once the voter registration deadline passes. And if you're alive enough to get a ballot and you cast it and then die, I don't see why they shouldn't count your vote, particularly as it would be a nice thing to do for the person, given that it was their dying wish. But you know how Republicans feel about dying wishes these days. We've been tipped off on that one, on the Ruth Bader Ginsburg, on her death and replacement on the court, despite, I didn't think that her last wish was going to do anything to motivate or move Donald Trump in any emotional way. That was never going to happen. But I guess just another indication of where they are and the headspace that they're in. Okay, well, let's round up some other stories, some of which we actually have links to, because we like to do that for you. Greg Dworkin is here to round those up. My guess is they have to do with the election, and just for kicks, is the election tightening, Greg?
As a matter of fact, no.
Oh, all right. Shoot. I thought we had something there, but I guess not. Good news. I'm glad, because
well, we need to talk about a couple of things. Why don't we start with this really interesting piece in the Washington Post? I think for our audience, it's absolutely positively worth going over.
Oh, all right.
And then maybe we'll take a look at the new PRRI poll out this morning, which is certainly getting a lot of eyeballs. But to set the stage, this is from the Washington Post, and there's so much material today. We got like 4 hours worth. So I'm going to, just give it to you as we go along, rather than tweeting the entire or Skyping to you the entire list.
Okay.
But this is from the Washington Post. Biden leads Trump.
Biden. I know that guy. Yes. Good. Oh, he's better than
So
Trump.
did Hillary Clinton.
That's true, too. She also.
For Democrats, goes on with the title. This is a worrisome campaign. Deja vu.
Okay. Sure. I mean,
right?
It's
the polls are once again delivering feel-good boosts to Democrats, yada, yada. But then the partisans, remember, they've been here before 4 years ago. The conflicting emotions can be overwhelming. I'm feeling anxious and trapped. It's tough. It is. It's a difficult time. Anxiety levels going to rise between now and the election, which is only about 15 days away. It's 2 weeks from tomorrow, folks.
Right. Oh, so
there's no time to turn things around in a bigly way, because a quarter to a third of the country's already voted, and soon to be you.
Yes. Right.
I mean, and I have to tell you, if you don't listen to me, I might just have to leave the kitchen.
Yeah, that's true. And I'll prove you all wrong. Another thing.
I'll go to some other room in there.
Not even the P tape will change my mind now.
Right, exactly. So I
would
think
like to
that
see
the
it, though.
sentiment is there. It's real, and I'm not belaboring it or belittling it or making fun of it in any way. It's real. But privately, Trump's advisors are less bullish than the boss, says the article, admitting he's behind in several key states. They think he can close the gap over the next 15 days, but ABC doesn't think so. Washington Post points out that the dumb people in the White House still don't get it, but the ABC story says, well, maybe they do. The headline there in ABC is Trump heads into final campaign stretch forced to play defense against Biden. The president's team is growing concerned over key battleground states. And the one that caught my eye, the paragraph that caught my eye in that article is internally, the Trump campaign is increasingly worried that the president's chances of winning North Carolina, a state the team is heavily invested in and views as essential for Trump's path to victory, has all but evaporated.
Aha. That's where Biden was in the picture with the other article.
Yes,
I noticed
Kamala
that.
Harris is off the quarantine list, and she's going to Florida today.
Okay.
And, again, I have to remind people, 3 weeks before the election, a Republican president was campaigning in Macon, Georgia.
Right. Rhymes with bacon.
Which ought to be
fun,
a totally safe state, and in fact is not. Okay?
Right.
So with that background.
Busy day at Warner Robins Airport.
Right? With that background, and with the idea that the White House is still battling itself, a house divided cannot stand.
Right.
Robert Costa has this huge story about Trump's den of dissent inside the White House task force as coronavirus surges. And it's been my position all along that the polls don't necessarily have to tighten, that the pandemic and coronavirus is driving this election. John Heilman, I saw, was on Morning Joe this morning pointing out that when he talks to pollsters with internal polls here, there, and everywhere else, the more coronavirus cases rise, the worse Trump does. It's now all over the country, but especially in the Midwest states that he needs. And he's getting clobbered on this, and this is the election, the issue that's going to decide the election. So with that, the PRRI poll comes out and says PRRI developed 2 likely voter models to measure potential support for each candidate under 2 turnout scenarios. This is a national poll out this morning.
Okay.
Out at midnight, actually. If voter turnout looks similar to 2016 with a 55% turnout, the survey finds Biden besting Trump by 14 points.
Okay.
54 to 40. If voter turnout is higher, 70%, that's their upper bound. As multiple indicators suggest is likely, Biden beats Trump by 18 points, 56 to 38.
So, okay. I'll take either one, really.
Not tightening. Biden's decision to select a black woman as his running mate resonates particularly with white college-educated women. More than 6 in 10 white women with a 4-year degree, 61% say this is a good decision compared to only 33% of white women without a college degree. Also, remember, one of the great things about the PRRI poll is that it keeps a close look on how religion fits into the American scene.
That's the extra R in the name. PRRR. Right.
Cracks in Trump's white Christian wall of support.
Okay.
It's put as a question mark. Historically, Republican presidential candidates, including Trump, have enjoyed strong support from white Christians. The survey points to emerging daylight between the views of white evangelicals on the one hand and white mainline Protestants and white Catholics on the other. 3 in 4 white evangelical Protestants approve of the job Trump is doing compared to 52% of white mainline Protestants and 49% of white Catholics. And white evangelical Protestants are the only religious group in which less than a majority say the spread of COVID-19 could have been controlled better.
Okay.
Among the findings, 3 in 4 Americans think the shutdowns, mask mandates, and other steps taken by state and local governments since the coronavirus pandemic began are reasonable measures to protect people, including majorities of Republicans, independents, and Democrats. 9 in 10 Democrats, 78% independents, and 65% of Republicans say they always wear masks in public places.
Sure.
White evangelical Protestants are the only religious group who are more likely to say Trump rather than Biden has strong religious beliefs. 2/3 of Americans say the winner of the popular vote rather than the Electoral College should determine the next president. And partisan views of the other party are harsh.
Yeah. I'll believe
all
that.
interesting stuff. But what you have to do is step back and look at the big picture. You don't get an 18-point lead if you keep your own party behind you. The reason that Jimmy Carter and Richard Nixon and W at various times in their presidency had relatively low approval ratings is because their own party was willing to say, I'm not really thrilled with this.
Yes.
So if you're seeing an 18-point lead, a 14-point lead, an 18-point lead, but the 14-point lead, the turnout's going to be much better than it was in 2016. So
Good.
I think all these low turnout, high turnout things are really interesting to set boundaries, but you're looking at high turnout.
Well, good. Okay. I mean, that was the better number anyway. They were both good.
So all of these are telling us that, first of all, it's not 2016, and second of all, that there are major groups in Trump's own party, cracks that are seen in terms of solid support. Biden has solid support from Democrats. It's a Democrats in array story, which is not all that interesting.
Yeah, they don't print those.
But the Republicans are actually having a lot of issues. And one of the other things that the PRI poll, I think I mentioned it, but as Natalie Jackson, the pollster, says, turning to the issues, pandemic. Also living in two different worlds. We know this, but it's stunning to see. Fox News Republicans are universally more extreme, and a majority of them trust Trump. Okay, Donald Trump, who Americans trust to provide accurate information about the coronavirus pandemic by party affiliation, and whether you're a Republican or, as Natalie Jackson calls it, a Fox News Republican. Okay, which is a different animal altogether. Okay.
All right.
And look at that last line
Let's do
on
that.
the chart. Who Americans trust to provide accurate information about the coronavirus by party affiliation and Fox News Republicans? Donald Trump, 1% of Democrats.
That might be an error.
It's probably legacy panhandle Democrats in Florida.
Or people who said, I'm a Democrat. What's that? I forget what that means. I don't know
what that means. 14% of all Americans.
Yeah.
Whereas 49% of all Americans trust Fauci and 51% university research centers. And the reason they trust university research centers is for a very good reason. Whenever those university research center doctors are on TV, they always put on a white coat that they don't wear at work.
Yes.
But they keep in the closet for interviews.
Right. That's what it's
I had
for.
3 of those.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You should,
I never wore them except when I was on TV.
I noticed that they have the names embroidered there.
Yeah,
if
your
you're only
name's
using it
embroidered on it. Exactly,
TV,
so you know it's your coat.
you should put Hi Mom on it.
Yeah, exactly. Or I'm voting for Biden. Right.
Right.
Anyway,
1-800-CARPETS.
who do you trust? Fox News Republicans, 58% trust Donald Trump on the pandemic, whereas all Republicans, only 39%. So when you look and say, well, okay, 60-40 is a blowout in American politics, but how does he get 40? And the answer is when you only get your information from OANN and Fox News, then that's what you think. But the number of people who are in that category and no other category is actually not that big. Yeah. So, they are on Twitter and they are in other places, and so they're having a fit now because the Russian disinformation that was fed through Rudy Giuliani to the New York Post isn't getting the appeal that they want. Donald Jr. is complaining about it. He says his Twitter reach has been restricted. He has only 1/3 the followers he used to. People aren't willing to talk about this stuff from the New York Post. And even if you don't believe the New York Post, you should talk about the substance of it. But in fact, with the rest of media and those outside the Fox News bubble, the story is that the FBI is investigating whether or not that stuff actually came from Russians.
Yes.
Because it's pretty clear it's Russian disinformation and it's garbage, and people are looking at it as garbage, and that's the right way to approach it. And so, no, it's not but her emails. No, it's not 2016 for many different reasons. But that's yet another to put on the list. Okay. So, it's interesting times and interesting approaches, both from media and from the public, about what's actually going on. The pandemic is what's driving stuff, not the New York Post story and Russian disinformation.
Yes. Now, it's Russian disinformation now because the new Director of National Intelligence, Ratcliffe, the guy who wasn't allowed to be DNI before, but then they switched their votes and decided he was just fine, even though he had faked his resume. He says it's not Russian disinformation. And you know how to read that. You all know what to do with Trump and Trumpster comments. It's now confirmed. Russian disinformation. There's no other conclusion you could possibly reach.
So the Senate is another issue that all is part and parcel of the same thing. Endangered Senate Republicans can't win without Trump. Can they win with him? And I don't remember if we covered this or whether it was the weekend. Things happen so quickly in the news cycle.
What was it?
Did we talk about the debate between Teresa Greenfield and Joni Ernst?
No. I think no.
Well, Joni Ernst burst into national scene
I do feel like it was
by claiming she was just average, everyday, aw shucks Iowa farmer.
Yeah. Oh, right.
Who was going to castrate hogs and make them squeal when she gets to Washington.
She just likes to do that. She's not a hog farmer.
Right? So as the report in the Washington Post says, so it was a jarring scene when Senator Ernst, now running for re-election, beamed into a virtual candidate debate last week from a studio a few blocks in the Capitol. Not only had the one-time Washington outsider established herself as a member of the GOP leadership and a frequent defender of the president, but this Seth-style child of Iowa farm life appeared stumped when asked what many Iowa politicians consider a rite of passage question. What's the price of soybeans today?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but that's not
Teresa
me.
Greenfield nailed the price of corn. And when asked the price of soybeans, she was off by $4.
Which is a lot because it's not that many dollars.
Right. And then started attacking the person who asked her the question.
Yeah, I did. I saw that clip. So I too was confused. Did we talk about it? I'm pretty sure I didn't play it, but I did see that clip. It was quite remarkable.
It's amazing.
The way she
Everybody in Iowa
squirms.
said, oh my God, this is the election.
Yeah.
Democrats could
good.
not contain their glee. Senator Ernst has had 6 years and she's forgotten Iowa, said Teresa Greenfield, Ernst's Democratic opponent, who turned the tables on Ernst by accusing the incumbent of going native in Washington and then not even knowing, what the price of soybeans were, which means something in Iowa.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if she had the right price from before she was elected or something. I wonder when the last time she checked.
In competitive Senate races across the country, including states where Trump remains popular, Republican incumbents are facing a conundrum: how to prove their pro-Trump bona fides to a MAGA movement that sees many longtime Republicans as insufficiently pure, while stopping the hemorrhaging among suburban moderates who wonder why they have been able to president. Look no further than Susan Collins in Maine to see that happening. And by the way, there's a lot of polls that say that with ranked choice voting, the second choice for Mainers is not Susan Collins. So she's in trouble there, regardless of how close the polls show. And all of them show Sarah Gideon leading by 1-3 point, that sort of thing. But with ranked voting, it's not going to happen that Collins is going to somehow make a comeback that you didn't see. Things have to change, in other words, for her to win.
Troubled.
Ernst is also in trouble, and you can add that to the long list. Even Cal Cunningham is still leading his North Carolina race, as far as we know, based on the polls. Certainly Hickenlooper is beating Gardner, and McSally is losing to Mark Kelly. And, there's voting in Nevada as we speak. A third of the country in certain states like Texas have already voted. A lot's going on here. And for the Republicans to get their Senate things together, they've got this dilemma. Do we run from Trump or do we stick with him? We don't know what to do. And now with 2 weeks left and everybody voting, they don't have a chance to run away from him. It's too late.
Well, all right. I'm in favor
as the
of
Post
that.
puts it, several of these Republicans are losing or clinging to narrow leads. South Carolina, for example, maybe Montana, maybe Alaska. But almost all of them are performing just slightly worse than Trump when looking at averages of polls. How each candidate navigates the dynamic over the next 2 weeks could determine whether the Republicans hold on to the 53-47 majority that is, among other things, served as a critical defender of the Trump presidency and helped transform the nation's federal courts into a far more conservative branch of government.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
In North Carolina, for example, President has 45% support, Till is 41%. Ernst and Trump are both narrowly losing in Iowa, but Trump pulls 46 to Ernst's 44. Georgia, Trump and Joe Biden are neck and neck, 48-46, with Biden in the lead. While Perdue has a narrow 3-point edge. That's closing. And, of course, Perdue himself made this incredibly damaging unforced error when he was introducing Trump at a rally. But he was certainly at a rally, and it's on tape. And he called Kamala Harris, comma, and it sounded like the macaca moment for George Allen in Virginia. And it was disrespectful. And he's somebody in the Senate who serves next to her, so there's no possible way that this could have been just a mistake.
Yes.
And it looks bad, and he looks bad.
Yeah, she's going to kick him.
Here it is. Perdue appeared to be trying to excite the Trump base Friday night when he attended a rally with the president in rural central Georgia and intentionally mispronounced the first name of Biden's running mate, his colleague of nearly 4 years, who would be the first black vice president if their ticket wins. And he drew cheers from the mostly white crowd. Ossoff immediately called it a racist tactic and raised more than $1 million in the 24 hours following the speech.
All right.
Right? John Cornyn, in an incredibly competitive race, told his constituents that he's really opposed Trump for a long time. He just did it behind doors.
Okay. Well,
open doors,
door?
Closed doors, we don't know. Just behind doors.
Doors. I didn't say what kind of doors they were.
I don't know if he said doors, but basically he's trying to run away from this.
I see. All right. Well, then you would want the doors open.
And then he said, and this is a great one, take this quote and put it on your bumper sticker.
All right.
Trump is maybe a lot of women who get married and think they're going to change their spouse, and that doesn't usually work out very well.
Okay.
We're not going to change Trump. He is who he is.
Oh, that's true. But
you either love him or hate him, and there's not much in between.
Okay. I mean, it's not like you didn't know this 4 years ago. It is amazing watching them try and scramble and find space.
And is Trump going to attack them for it?
Yeah, sure. He already has on Ben Sass, right? Mm-hmm. He's done that. And
then Collins.
Oh, yeah, right. So they've all gotten it. It should be an interesting week or so then.
Yeah, let him attack Graham.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Continue on with Greg Dworkin, rounding up stories of the day. I don't remember where we left off, but it was awesome, and we should either begin there again or move on to the next topic.
Well, what I want to look at now is Trump's den of dissent inside the White House task force as coronavirus surges. Before we get to that, there is one other piece of information, though, that I do want to concentrate on. We were talking about the PRRI poll, and people get really upset when you tell them the national polls show Trump is getting crushed and it's really not tightening. And they say, yes, but the Electoral College is what matters, and it only matters what's happening in Michigan and North Carolina and states like that. Well, we did talk about the fact that the Trump campaign is pessimistic about North Carolina right now.
That's good.
But even more importantly, there are two factors that you have to consider when looking at the national polls. Number one, they are highly correlated with what happens in the states. When you get below 4 or so, then the state polls and the Electoral College really comes into play. But when you're up more than 5, it doesn't. Okay. Because, again, just like you're looking at a national poll that says Biden's up 18, and without even looking at the crosstabs, that means that there must be Republicans deserting him. When you're up by 10, 10.5 in the national polls, some of those votes come from places like Michigan, Wisconsin, and the battleground states. And so, the idea that you're going to somehow sneak into the Electoral College while you're losing 10 points nationally doesn't happen. They're just too correlated. And even further, you get even more information than the sparse number of quality state polls we get. The individual districts are polling all the time. Sometimes that's internal stuff that you don't see, but professional prognosticators the professional Nostradamus among us, like Dave Wasserman, get access to these polls. And yesterday he tweeted, there is a suburban GOP-held House seat that Romney won by 15%. Everybody's guessing it's probably in Indiana. And Trump won by 10%. And today, at least two private surveys I've seen here have Trump down 10% there. In the past few weeks, I've heard the word bloodbath uttered in multiple conversations with GOP pollsters and makers. Henry Gomez says, in my reporting on Ohio last week, I heard of several suburban districts like this where Republicans have seen internal polling showing Trump down considerably. So what I'm saying is one of the ways that Wasserman in 2016 picked up that things aren't going so well for Hillary is surprisingly in these districts she was doing much more poorly than the national polls would suggest. And what he's saying is the exact opposite is happening this time. There are no signs of a Trump comeback. In fact, if anything, the bottom is falling out in some of these districts, so it matches the national polls. So when you read something like that from Wasserman and then you see a poll that says that Biden's up 18, you go, okay, well, that's what the state district polls were telling us.
Yeah. And, right, I mean, I guess if that doesn't answer your question about why it's not 2016.
It's just not.
Yeah. Because the polls are showing us the opposite of that year, so that's why it's not. Okay.
Well, also, Trump's incumbent. Also, there's a pandemic, and also the pandemic is the driving thing. So you get narrative stories that match that, and we're going to go over one of them. This is the New York Times. It's the lead story in the pundit roundup, why these voters rejected Hillary Clinton but are backing Joe Biden. For many Democrats and independents who sat out 2016, voted for third-party candidates or backed Donald Trump, Mr. Biden is more acceptable to them in ways large and small than Mrs. Clinton was. You don't even need to read the story. You can argue whether it's misogyny or whether it's other things or the right-wing smear jobs. It doesn't matter. The point is, it is. I mean, it's just true. And so you have yet another reason why this is not 2016. The other interesting thing is that not only is Trump doing incredibly poorly with women, but his decision for the rest of the campaign to try to lead his rallies with lock her up charts about Gretchen Whitmer, who in fact is popular in Michigan because of the stance that she takes with coronavirus, trying to keep it under control, even though the Republicans don't like it. Everybody else in the state does.
All right.
So he's attacking women, and he's attacking strong women, and he's attacking strong women because they're taking coronavirus seriously and he's not. He thinks this is a campaign winner, and he keeps doing it on the trail. It's crazy. That's not how you convince undecideds and suburban women that you need to win to not vote for Joe Biden, but to vote for you. So, in effect, he's basically conceding the loss and says, but for my ego, I have to have these crowd-pleasing, entertainment shows that have nothing to do with a campaign anymore. They're just show business. And I'm going to go on these tours. They're going to be super spreader tours.
Yep.
And they're going to be responsible for people getting sick. And what the hell? I like people idolizing me, and so I'm just going to do it anyway.
I like sick people, okay?
Yeah, exactly. So it's crazy. It's just absolutely crazy stuff. And so that's why that leads us to this Trump's den of dissent inside the White House task force as coronavirus surges. As summer faded into autumn and the novel coronavirus continued to ravage the nation unabated, Scott Atlas, a neuroradiologist whose commentary on Fox News led President Trump to recruit him to the White House, consolidated his power over the government's pandemic response. Now, you have to remember, this is a task force which is led by Mike Pence.
Yes.
And so this story is what a terrible person and a terrible administrator and a terrible leader Mike Pence is.
Yes, and he'll try to convince you otherwise soon.
Right, but, lying to the camera isn't going to do it. Atlas shot down attempts to expand testing. He openly feuded with other doctors on the coronavirus task force, succeeded in largely sidelining them. If you have Trump's ear, you get to do that.
Yes.
He's been obnoxious. He's been at meetings where other people and even gathering that Blexit paid gathering on the White House lawn where everybody was wearing masks, but he wasn't. He has basically gotten all the actual docs pissed off. And, one of the people he sidelined is Deborah Birx. Birx recently, according to this article, confronted Vice President Pence, who chairs the task force, about the acrimony. According to two people familiar with the meeting, Birx, whose profile and influence has eroded considerably since Atlas's arrival, told Pence's office that she doesn't trust Atlas, doesn't believe he's giving Trump sound advice, and wants him removed from the task force. Pence did not take sides and told Atlas and Birx to bring data bolstering their perspectives and work it out.
Oh, all right. Well,
worst possible thing an administrator can do when you're actually trying to run something and get productive things done.
He's delegating.
Worst possible thing you can do.
I thought it was good. Delegate. Hey, you settle this.
Yeah, you settle this. I'm not going to pay attention.
Okay.
Well,
yeah, I'm very busy.
It's awful. But again, that falls directly on Pence. The reason Pence, of course, didn't want to do anything is because he was afraid of ticking off his boss, Donald Trump. And as a result, the coronavirus task force, which we knew was useless, is now worse than useless because it's purveying bad information, bad to the point where Scott Atlas tried to convince people on Twitter that masks were bad for you.
Yes.
That's where Trump gets the information. 85% of people who wear masks get coronavirus, and so it's worse than if you don't wear a mask. He said that.
Yes.
And Atlas repeated it on Twitter and got himself banned.
Okay. Is that what he was repeating? Because I did wonder when Trump said it.
It was the tweet about mask stuff.
Uh-huh.
And they had to remove the tweet.
I saw that it was about masks, and it had a link to an article. And I actually followed the link. And, I mean, this article, honestly, if you can get through the first paragraph without an eye roll and injuring yourself, I don't know what kind of... This wasn't a medical journal or anything, but it was just bizarre.
No,
but,
it was mass work? No, said Atlas. And that's the tweet that got him...
Okay. I was just curious.
And he linked to an article from the American Institute for Economic Research, a libertarian think tank behind the Great Barrington Effort, which is a crazy idea that's, tries to get people to sign it to say we don't want masks. And, a lot of the signatures are like fake names.
Oh, okay. All right.
Now when you go and you look up the names, it's like, hey, would you blow me? That kind of thing. I mean, really, fake name. So obviously,
you're all familiar with that, right? Just checking. I mean, it's not just. I've
that's
seen
a
that
famous one, right?
Yes, I think so. I'm hoping everybody else thinks so too. Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes
they used to use it all the time. Our producer today for the show was, "Hey, would you blow me?"
Anyway, I wasn't expecting that one, but there are some other classics that like the middle school crowd would be familiar with too. But,
exactly, it's all middle school stuff, and they sign and they're treating that as like a serious document that Scott Atlas is pushing.
Clearly not.
And Birx and Fauci looked at this and said, "What?"
Yeah, now I got it. And
Pence said, "I can't decide between the two of you." I mean, Tony Fauci, you spent your entire life doing this. You're the world's expert on some of this stuff. You've done AIDS. You've done all this stuff. And Atlas, you linked to this article with a
pretty convincing
a signature from "Hey, would you blow me?" And I can't decide between the two of you. You guys work it out.
And I don't mean Haywood. It's you two who have to work this out.
So no wonder Birx is pissed.
Yeah. Well, it was a long time coming. We kind of wanted her sidelined. We didn't want her sidelined by a even bigger
I thought
idiot,
she should have resigned and made a splash, because the way it happens this way is, of course, everything Trump touches dies. Mm-hmm. But when you die quietly, you don't do any good, right? If you go out like some of the other people who, like Rick Bright and some of the other people who resigned and said, "I'm not doing this because they're trying to push us to go away from science," then, it means stuff. So the article says Trump and many of his advisors have come to believe that the key to a revived economy and a return to normality is a vaccine. They've given up on anything else and everything else, said a senior administration official involved in the pandemic response. It's just too hard. It's too hard a slog.
Okay. Well,
so infectious disease and other public health experts said the friction inside the White House has impaired the government response. It seems to me this is policy-based evidence-making rather than evidence-based policy-making.
Cute.
Said Mark Lipsitch, director of the Center for Communicable Disease Dynamics at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Mark Lipsitch is one of the world's foremost epidemiologists. I had the pleasure of working with him on a couple of projects. In other words, if your goal is to do nothing, then you create a situation in which it's okay to do nothing, and you find some experts to make it complicated.
Like climate change.
Right?
Same play.
Fauci, Birx, Surgeon General Jerome Adams, and other members have confided in others. They're dispirited. Birx and Fauci have advocated dramatically increasing the nation's testing capacity. Trump is ignoring them. Trump is using Fauci in ads. Fauci says that, look, that's unwarranted. I never said such stuff.
True, right? That.
Again, I've been on this horse for a long time. They haven't done it, but a lot of these folks really need to resign. They just need to go out and say, I can't work with this guy.
Yeah. I guess there's still time for it to be effective. And, if you
well,
should
they're
have done
hoping,
it one time ago, it only gets worse.
They're hoping that in 2 weeks, that's the end of it. The problem is that, it's until January.
Right. That has been a big concern of mine of late, thinking about the various ways that Trump could really screw things up. I've kind of gone the other direction in the last few days. What if Trump loses and accepts the loss? But what does he do between now and January? I think maybe a different set of reactions than if he's trying to fight to save the presidency. Although, he's never been particularly good at saying, like, let's do normal things that will increase our credibility with the American people. That's never been his style. But I imagine things get even worse if he says, I don't even have to consider this. And he's angry at the American people and saying, I'll punish you for not reelecting me. And he's capable of that.
He's
who knows what
thinking
happens
it. What they'll allow him to do
true.
after he's already lost is
right.
another thing altogether, because the guardrails on the institutions may be rickety and missing, key parts that have fallen into the ocean. But on the other hand, after he's lost, there's little reason for them to play nice to him. If the senators, as we talked about in the previous segment, are already starting to run away from him, then why should the institutionalists stick with him?
That's true. People could just say, I'm not executing
here's an example. Trump promised the vaccine, and he said he's going to do it before the election, and all the vaccine makers and the FDA said, nah.
Yeah. Well, they're going to be around, and they know, it's not like the vaccine makers are going out of
and the rest of them want to be around too. So, the only reason I'm optimistic is because a lot of the enablers who are perfectly willing to go along with Trump aren't going to be willing after he's lost.
Mm-hmm. Well, that leaves small bore items that I think would be tragic, but we could all live with. Like, I don't know if they can stop him from going to the China room and smashing all the plates. But I guess
maybe he'll smash that bust of Winston Churchill.
Yeah, and but who knows? Any number of things.
Maybe he'll get
that can happen.
Drink. So I guess he won't get drunk and pray with Henry Kissinger.
Right, or else he'll say, "What the hell? Now's the time." I've abstained from. I've claimed to have abstained from drink all this time, but what's the difference now? Let's just drink up the White House booze, if there is any.
Anyway, I think I'll end this with a Sarah Longwell piece.
You will, but yes,
from The Atlantic. Sarah Longwell's an interesting character, Republican, conservative, but turned off to Trump. She's one of the never Trumpers. She formed a Republican Voters Against Trump. She's the one that does all the focus groups, particularly with women, about how they're reacting to Trump. And you may recall, I think I presented it on the show last week. Her last one, none of the undecided voters were going to vote for Trump in the end. She has a piece called Why People Who Hate Trump Stick With Him. Since 2018, I've conducted roughly 50 focus groups with Trump voters to understand the shifting dynamics within the Republican Party. In the simplest, broadest terms, if it's too long and you don't want to read it, in the simplest, broadest terms, those who are abandoning Trump are doing so because they place most of the blame for the state of the country on the president.
Okay, that happens.
And those who are sticking with him, despite their expressions of discomfort with him personally, are driven by an even deeper scorn for the president's detractors. So, he's terrible, he's awful, the country's going to hell in a handbasket, but at least he's sticking it to the libs. There's a lot of truth in that, and that's what she's finding from her focus groups.
All right, well, I can believe that. They've said it all along. The question is, of course, whether there are enough of them, and as you've pointed out a number of times, it doesn't look like it. If the race in 2016 was so close and the margin was so thin, and we know about people who are saying, I hate him and I'm leaving,
Well,
And
some people say that. Here's what she writes. Anyone watching this part of one of my focus groups would assume that virtually none of the women would vote for Trump again. But when I ask who they plan to vote for in November, the results are mixed. Some are voting for or leaning toward Biden. Some are voting for or leaning toward Trump, and many are still undecided. I don't understand how, except that you have to assume these are all conservative Republican women in conservative states like Indiana who were brought up to despise the Democratic Party. And so they don't like Trump, but they're left with the alternative of, but that means voting for a Democrat, and I can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, there are such people.
Because I'm a one-issue voter, abortion or something along those lines. Some of the women who are definitely voting for Biden had immediate buyer's remorse after voting for Trump in 2016. One of them memorably told me she would vote for a dog over Donald Trump. Many women who fall in this category say if they had to do it all over again, they would have voted for Clinton. But most of the women say their thinking evolved over time. As they weighed the foibles of the president against sins of the cities and the elites. Sins of the elites, they said. I misread that as cities, but that's what they meant. Sodom and Gomorrah, who they viscerally distrust. For instance, during the focus groups I convened throughout Trump's impeachment, few of the women had anything nice to say about Trump's actions, but the real contempt was reserved for Democrats and the media, whom they viewed as unnecessarily adversarial to Trump. And the plain fact is they were unwilling to give much weight to an argument about the rule of law and abuse of power because it didn't have a visible impact on their lives. But the pandemic has. In fact, it created a noticeable shift in support away from Trump and toward Biden. So this is in support of my thesis, which I said back in March, pandemic's everything. And I said at the time, all of the political prognosticators who say, okay, well, let's set the pandemic aside. These other things, and this is how we do our work, are just getting it wrong.
Yes,
and that's in fact true.
They did not know how to factor in a pandemic.
But
they don't have a model.
Yes. They didn't know how to do it, so they wouldn't do it, but they had to because it was going to be overwhelming, and so they missed the boat if they didn't. Right. Before the pandemic, when focus groups participants were asked about how things were going in the country, they'd split their responses into two separate categories. They thought things were going well in terms of the economy and thought Trump didn't get enough credit for that. And they also said the mood of the country was dark and divided and used terms like powder keg. In focus groups over the past 6 months, participants have felt no need to bifurcate. The most common response is a variation on the term shit show. Personal pain often spills into these women's answers. They note they were furloughed or laid off. Somebody in their family was. Underlying medical conditions, are in remission from cancer, and are frustrated with people who won't wear masks. Others talk about struggling with loneliness or trying to raise young children without the help of daycare or family. Some have lost parents. Some refer to George Floyd's death and the protests that gripped the country. Others say they joined the protests in their town or city. Again, these are conservative Republican women. Occasionally, I invite participants to a second focus group to see if their views have changed. And in November 2019, a woman from Pennsylvania explained she planned to vote for Trump again because it was better to go with the poison you know than the poison you don't.
It's not.
But in August, she said she's leaning toward Biden and specifically cited George Floyd.
So
that's progress.
Yes. Plus, lots of people know Joe Biden, so he counts as even if you think he's poison, you know him.
Right. In April, a woman from Wisconsin said she couldn't vote for Democrats because the party didn't reflect her values. And in August, she said she couldn't vote for another 4 years of Trump for her young son's sake. Trump's done nothing to win these voters back. In the focus group I convened immediately after the presidential debate, not a single one of the 9 swing state women in the group was committed to voting for president again. More than half said they're definitely or most likely voting for Biden. Trump's alienation of the voters who took a chance on him in 2016 tells part of the story of Biden's standing, and these defectors might be enough to put Biden over the top in November. But the story is no wholly good one for Democrats. Even in the past 6 months, some participants have continued to say they'll back Trump. They don't think Trump is doing great, but that's the media's fault. Some meaningful number of voters who are clear-eyed about Trump and his manifest failures will stick with him because they believe Democrats are worse and the media aren't to be trusted. And these aren't voters who are glued to Fox News. Often they don't think about politics at all. They're not on Twitter. They swim in a cultural soup of Trumpism surrounded by friends, family, and social media acquaintances who live more exclusively in a right-wing media ecosystem. That's why I mentioned places like Indiana. If everybody around you is saying that, even if you don't watch, you kind of hear it. So even if Biden pulls off a landslide victory, that ecosystem will remain, and so will a dislike of Democrats and distrust of the mainstream media. Getting rid of Trump won't end the opposition's problems. So that's, a worthy and real cautionary tale. But I say take it one step at a time. Let's get the landslide, then we'll deal with this.
Okay. Let's do that.
Now, will it be a landslide? We don't know.
Oh.
Can Trump still win? To be sure.
Yeah.
But
all right.
it's not looking like it.
Okay, that's true. No indication that he will, but he's on the ballot.
Right. And then the companion story from the New York Times, we mentioned why these voters rejected Hillary Clinton but are backing Joe Biden. I feel like I should read this to, clean your mouth out after that
Okay.
sour taste. For many Democrats and independents who sat out 2016, voted for third-party candidates, or backed Donald Trump, Mr. Biden is more acceptable in ways large and small. I knew early that Trump definitely wasn't the guy for me, recalled Mr. Moline, an independent. But when it came to Mrs. Clinton, I guess I had a bad taste in my mouth from her husband's 8 years in office. He voted for Gary Johnson, a decision he regrets, and he feels that he's backing Mr. Biden.
Okay.
Okay? I identify more with Biden. You want to call me a male chauvinist? Whatever. Doesn't matter.
All right. I'll call you that.
Right? The point seems almost obvious, too obvious to note Mr. Biden is not Mrs. Clinton. Yet for many Democrats and independents who sat out 2016, voted for third parties, or backed Trump, it's a rationale for the vote that comes up repeatedly. Mr. Biden is more acceptable to them than Mrs. Clinton was. Personal and political, sexist than not, and these differences help make them feel more comfortable voting Democrat this time.
Okay. Yeah, we'll deal with the problem you had in 2016 some other time.
Right.
For now, vote, and then we'll decide what to do with you after.
Right. The Republicans did a fantastic job of making Hillary Clinton seem like the devil for 20-plus years, so she was a hard sell, said Aaron Stearns, the Democratic chairman in Warren County in northwestern Pennsylvania. It's just a lot easier with Biden because he's a guy, and he's an old white guy. I hate saying it, but it's the truth.
Yeah. And there wasn't a 20, 30-year project to brand him as evil.
But he's decent.
Happen.
Again, we said this a year ago.
I mean, that would have been hard to do.
His secret superpower is he's a decent guy. I mean, after the dueling town halls, as an example, Trump was bad, Biden was fine. Mm-hmm. But the most important thing that happened was after the town hall. In Trump's town hall, you turn off the cameras, he leaves.
Yes.
In Biden's town hall, he spent 25, 30 minutes talking to the audience, saying, I'm here to answer whatever questions you felt like weren't answered during the time. Did you get your answer? Did you do this? He just stuck around and talked to people.
That's people like that. I think
people like that, and they saw it was on the screen. They wouldn't play the sound, but it was on the screen. People saw it. And again, television is a very visual medium.
Yes.
The chyrons matter more than what the people are saying when you see the talking heads.
True. Yeah. Well, that was another pivot moment that he walked away from. I'm not certain why he didn't become president that day, but he must have had something else to do, I guess.
And that's why, during W's years, the mission accomplished landing on the aircraft carrier was an evil, brilliant stunt that wound up being an albatross around his neck forever because you couldn't forget it.
Yeah, but right,
at the time
right.
Remember, it worked.
Right.
Remember Chris
At the
Matthews?
time,
I got a thrill down my leg when I saw him land on the carrier.
Yes, I do. Right. Okay, it did. It worked on him.
Visuals matter on television.
That's true. Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, well, I understand it, and like I said, it does occur to me every once in a while. I'm sure there are some sexist roots to it as well, but yeah, there just never was the kind of campaign over decades against Biden that there was against Clinton. And it matters. They wanted to try to compress it into a year, and you see what happens. It doesn't work. It takes a long time for something like this to catch on.
So over at 538, Nathaniel Rakich has just published a very helpful little reminder here in terms of where we're at.
Okay.
2020, Biden is up 10.7 right now with the PRI poll added.
Okay.
And the USC Dorns Life is also increasing, so we're not seeing any tightening here. So Biden up 10.7 in 2020. 2016, Clinton was up 6.9 before she went down to 3 in a few days. Biden's not going to go down to 3 in a few days. In 2012, Romney was up 1.2. In 2008, Obama was up 6.8.
Yeah.
Okay. In 2004, Bush was up 2.4. and that was one of those inelastic 2.4s that we could never catch him.
Okay.
In 2000, Bush was up 2.7. We did catch him.
Yes.
Didn't help, but we caught him. In 1996, Clinton was up 14.9. 1992, Clinton was up 14.1. So this is looking somewhere between Obama 2008 and Clinton 1992.
Okay.
Right now.
Good years.
And going back to 1980, my favorite, Reagan was up 2.3 at this point.
1980, yes.
But then the
did much
debate
better in
happened,
84.
and then Reagan took off. And
Yeah.
so this is the election that I'm looking to see, does it most closely match 2008 Obama? Or is it 1980, where after the debate, all of a sudden, Biden widens his lead? So I'm not looking for tightening. Maybe it'll happen. You can't say. To be sure, it could. I'm not looking for Trump to win. To be sure, it could. But I have to be clear. I totally understand the trauma of 2016 on Democrats. But on the other hand, to note that Biden is ahead by 10 points is not, okay, we're all going home. We don't need to do anything anymore.
Okay.
If I put that on Twitter, people
sure.
immediately say,
Oh, yeah,
stop
yeah,
saying
no,
that.
right.
We have to act like we're 20 points ahead. No, you don't.
It doesn't matter whether you say it or not.
Doesn't
They
matter
will
whether
say
it or
that
not.
you
just
thinking
look
of saying
at
it.
where we're at. And this is not a call to stop voting.
Right.
A third of the
Don't.
country may have voted already, so you're not going to affect those people.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry that you don't like good news. Get over it. I am.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, go vote. I understand Armando is on his way to vote right now. The
Good.
weather
It's
has turned
raining.
well. Yeah. He said the weather got better and he's going to go. So, okay. So there you go. We have not said that terrible thing for which you should take us to task. Okay. Good. Well, thank you.
Right.
It's,
I'll see you
sums it
Wednesday.
nicely. Yes, we'll do it that way. We'll catch up on a couple questions that have been asked. I'll prompt you on it on Tuesday so you can do some homework. Very good. All right. We'll be back in just a minute. See you then.
It's 3, artless work. Doesn't matter. Trump's still getting clobbered.
Okay. Well,
That's what happens when you have your own party dessert.
That sounds good. All right. Well, we're welcome
gonna
back,
be the
everybody. To
See you later.
Yeah. Okay. Now you're going to round the door because
I can
everybody has
stay
to
and
clear.
just do that.
Okay. Yes. Let's do that because I was just trying to take
I'll
notes
forget.
frantically. But yeah, Karen was probably just getting agitated that, or let's say
see.
slightly
Are we on?
disappointed, perhaps, that we hadn't answered her question. But now we will in an extended version of the Greg Dworkin Hour. Karen had asked us whether it was possible the recent white working class Republican registration edge is increased over Dems in some jurisdictions because so many Dems were already registered for the 2018 midterms. She tagged you on this one. And rather than make it homework, I guess we can just clean up now. How about that?
No, it's a great question. And there's a couple of different ways of approaching the answer.
Right. Mine is run away.
And, for example, North Carolina keeps really good statistics on this. Mm-hmm. So you can go to the old North State politics blog and get this information. And it turns out that in 2020 so far with the early voting, upwards of 20% of the voters did not vote in 2016.
Okay.
And that sounds
Yeah.
great. All these new voters are coming in. But it turns out it was a very similar number in 2016.
Okay.
So there's always going to be turnover. And part of the turnover with registration is getting rid of people off of the rolls who haven't voted in years. Maybe because, like the story you told about the Michigan guy.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
You die and then you get thrown off the rolls.
Yes.
So it's
Typically.
there's that. And then at the same time, there's, for example, Nate Cohen's polling for New York Times Siena, which has been very favorable to Biden. But in the polling, when he looks to see what's the breakdown, the political party breakdown, self-ID, he finds that the polls are running a little bit more Republican than in 2016. And yet the polls are better for Biden. So just knowing your registration doesn't tell you who you're going to vote for, particularly, as we talked about, with that 18-point national lead, meaning that some Republicans are voting for the Democrat. And the other part that usually is left off with the, well, what about the Republican versus Democratic registration numbers? The NDAs, the NPAs, the no party affiliated or the independents, you might call them, or other. Each state has a different way of classifying them.
GDIs, yeah.
They're large. I mean, in Connecticut, independents outnumber Democrats who outnumber Republicans. So just looking at Democratic versus Republican registration doesn't tell you anything. A lot of younger voters and newer voters are registering as independents to vote in this election, and then, or they're not registering at all, and then they'll have the opportunity to register for a party later. And some will choose one, and they'll only choose one at the time that you get to vote in a primary. Otherwise, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You don't have to declare that you're a Democrat in a national election, a general election, a state election that's a general election, because who cares? But in a primary, if you're one of those states that only party members can vote, in 2 years, you'll register as a party if you feel like it, or you won't vote in that primary. So looking at just the registration statistics alone, which Republicans are trying to tell themselves to make them feel better, is not really the picture at all.
Okay. Well, does that answer the question? I hope so.
I hope so. But Tom Boner, B-O-N-I-E-A, Tom Boner.
Problem.
If you look at his Twitter feed, has a lot of modeling and has discussed, particularly in Pennsylvania, the meaning of the registration disparities. And it's not what it appears.
Okay. I'm satisfied. Phil.
Anyway, so that's that. Any other questions come up?
Let's see. Anything else happen between then and no? I
wanted to do that one because I know I was not going to remember to do it on Wednesday.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to email it to you or something, but but by the time Wednesday rolls around, who knows what happens, right? Trump tries to break the world record for a number of Big Macs or something, and we have to cover that.
Right. Anyway, so anytime you start to have a little anxiety about what's happening in 2020 and, you get a flashback to 2016 or whatever, just tell yourself it's the pandemic, stupid. Just tell that to yourself.
Okay.
It's not the economy. It's the pandemic.
It was supposed to be.
It's driving
it's the
everything.
Pandemic. Yes. And you can think of the pandemic as an economic event if you like.
If you wish, because they're related. But the other thing is that Trump seems to be totally devoted in his rallies between now and Election Day in making everybody pay attention to the fact that it's the pandemic and he's doing everything wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every single day he's on it. Okay, here's another rally that's a super spreader event. And given the fact that that's driving the election, these numbers are not surprising.
No. Okay, right. I noticed he trotted out the tests cause coronavirus line again.
That masks are no good, and let's elevate Scott Atlas, and who's this Tony Fauci guy to tell me what to do, and let's go, because I feel like it, I want to go and have a huge rally with everybody not wearing masks. Every day, that's put in front of people's faces.
Yes.
And when the numbers are going up in Wisconsin, and then the first story is Trump is here, and he's not wearing a mask, and all this is happening, and then the second story is, by the way, the ICUs are full.
Yes, right.
It's not helping them.
Yeah, not enough coverage of that. I mean, that's what we were waiting for the whole time.
Well, luckily,
early on.
In Oklahoma and North and South Dakota, in Wisconsin and in Michigan, it's getting covered.
Where are all my Film Your Hospital people? They all took the day off.
Anyway, that's it. Sorry for the extension, but as I said, I didn't want to forget doing it. And I'll see you on Wednesday.
Yes, okay, fine. Unless you just want to extend into
metaphorically
Tuesday.
Speaking, because we're on radio.
Right, true. But I will see your little icon, the seal.
Right. And if you don't listen to me, I'm leaving the kitchen. Take care.
Very good. Thanks, Greg. Take care. I hope that has answered the question. I guess, Karen, you're the only one who can tell us whether it's adequately answered the question. I mean, Greg can tell us that it answered the question. I can nod along and say it answered the question. Okay, we'll make you the final arbiter of that, and that's fine because you ask good questions. And if you have a follow-up, you'll have to wait for an answer unless you're willing to take a Twitter answer, in which case that's fine. And maybe we can report on that after the fact. But let us know, and we'll see where we stand with all of that. This has been... this is it. I should just sign off. This has been the Kagro in the Morning Show, and I don't know what else to do for... there's plenty of stories, obviously, but one of the downsides of... such an extensive segment. There's really no downside to an extensive segment with Greg is that I then become dependent on Greg and say, what about the second hour? What are we going to do? But I have plenty, lots to catch up on. I guess one story I'll at least note, there's no point in reading through the whole thing because I think you'll get it straight away from the headline. So we'll talk instead about the meta issues surrounding it. The Washington Post headline Is it today or yesterday's? What's the date they put on this one? The 17th, so Saturday. For some reason, only makes my radar today. How the Sturgis motorcycle rally may have spread coronavirus across the upper Midwest. Again, for meta critique, we'll stop and say, well, I know how the Sturgis motorcycle rally may have spread coronavirus across the upper Midwest. 350,000 people went to Sturgis, which is normally a town of 7,000 people, and they were bikers, and bikers don't particularly, their health, not always a top priority for them, so that's fine. They, of course, notoriously anti-authority, etc. So, of course, they went there in the middle of a pandemic, which this article notes. I thought, it's probably quite obviously true, self-evident, in fact, but it was worth stating somewhere in the top couple of paragraphs that I skimmed through on the story this morning was, first of all, they put the number at nearly 500,000, which is even larger than I had heard. But pointing out that in the middle of the pandemic, this was certainly the largest public gathering going on in the country, but because it's a global pandemic, possibly the largest mass event in the world at the time. And I mean, what an unfortunate decision, let's say, to put it mildly, that the world's largest mass gathering in the middle of the pandemic was a gathering of anti-authoritarian, what the hell do I care, live fast, die young, even though most bikers are considerably older than we think of in terms of people who, ride motorcycles around. But like the worst possible people, honestly, for something like this gathered. I know I'm insulting a bunch of them, but what do I care? I mean, they all have coronavirus. So anyway, worst possible choice in terms of the kind of person to gather in the largest group in the world. It really is. So I thought that was sort of an interesting way of putting it. And again, here it's a bit meta. The how this rally spread coronavirus is quite obvious to you, to anybody else who's sort of read the news about how the virus works. If you gather 500,000 people in a space and you flout all the rules about how to not spread the virus, you will spread the virus. And the larger your mass gathering, the more people who will get it, and the more people who will take it elsewhere with them and give it to others. I mean, it's just basic how germ theory works thing. But it is interesting to see the Washington Post cover it because it's also sort of a, well, duh moment. But you need to have those moments in print in order to wake up everybody else who will, 75% of them will still say, well, duh, of course, that's how it's going to work. Everybody knew that was how it was going to work. But it pays to see it in print, so then they go around and talk about it in the last couple of weeks before the election, and it has some additional impact. But it's interesting that this article got so much attention, got passed around on Twitter so much, given that, for instance, how many weeks ago was it? It's probably like 6 weeks ago we read, could it be? I don't know. A bunch of weeks ago, somewhere in my archives, we could pull it out. Maybe I'll make a note to myself about the other Sturgis story. But there was that one story. All the Republicans and anti-maskers denied it, of course. But there was that one story where somebody estimated that something like 250,000 cases across America could be traced in some way to the Sturgis rally. And I guess that makes it probably a lot of people thought that was a ludicrous number, but of course, if 500,000 people went to the rally, that makes it, I think, a lot more plausible. Obviously, not everyone who went to the rally came out of there with coronavirus. This story focuses, at least at the top, on one such person who did go, and although it was very interesting that this person got or felt certain that the coronavirus infection that they got came from their visit to Sturgis. And I mean, all the circumstantial evidence would say yes, but somehow they note in here that the doctors who did the contact tracing on him, for some reason, decided that it was somehow inconclusive that it had come from Sturgis. And I mean, I guess that's possible. He's from Nebraska, so he didn't have very far to go compared to others. But certainly he could have picked it up, before he got to Sturgis, or after he left Sturgis, picked it up in the, diner that he stopped in on the way home. Could be anything like that, but I would consider that to be Sturgis related. What was he doing riding a motorcycle all the way from Nebraska to South Dakota, which do border one another, but, it's still a lot of miles to cover at a time when we weren't supposed to be traveling. But, anyway, I just thought that was sort of interesting that happened, and that people have any doubts. But very interesting that he got this in a way that was very clearly related to his decision to attend the Sturgis rally, and yet it gets classified as not Sturgis related, and as the writers put in their article here. It just goes to show you that even under the best of circumstances, with actual active contact tracing, this, compared to the number of people who went, got ill, and then refused to be tested because either they bought into the Donald Trump line about testing causing cases, or they were just like, I'm sick, what do I care? I'm just going to go home and try to recover, and I don't care what it is that has me sick. Of course, normal people say, what has me sick, so that I can look up what is the cure for this thing, or pay someone who actually knows what the cure is to tell me what it is, and then I will go do that thing. But I guess bikers are notorious holistics, I guess. I don't know. They don't like going to doctors, I guess. So a lot of people didn't get tested, didn't submit to contact tracing, didn't make any effort to help anybody else figure out that they might also have been exposed to coronavirus. This guy did. And then, he didn't take it seriously beforehand, but he did take it seriously afterwards. So, okay, best case scenario, right? And still, they don't classify it as Sturgis related, which just, I think is a kind of a crazy thing. I don't know what the official number is, but it makes the 250,000 idea more plausible. If 500,000 of them go, not all of them get it, but then they pick it up and it doesn't manifest itself for a couple of days. But the point is that they all disperse. Only 7,000 people live in Sturgis. Everybody else, the rest of the 500,000 people who were there, came from somewhere else, and many of them from several states away. They said here that attendees were from all 50 states. So somehow somebody must have flown their motorcycle from Hawaii I don't know. They said all 50 states. Maybe they were exaggerating. I don't know. But they all went back somewhere. Or maybe who knows? You could probably fly from Hawaii to mainland U.S. and rent a Harley if you really wanted to. So who knows? I'm not exactly sure how they got there. But the article explains how they know this. Not only, of course, would people be volunteering that information. I'm sure you get to Sturgis. People love telling one another where they're from, or it's on their patches, on their vests, what have you. But let's see. Others were traced apparently by cell phone data. So that's one of the sub-stories of this piece, is that there's a particularly interesting study. We've seen it before with other items and other mass gatherings. But, I wonder what cell phone usage is like among the bikers. On the one hand, you'd think they'd be like, I don't care to be even connected to the world when I'm out riding, and I just, I solo it, what have you. Or in my gang, smartphones are looked down upon because of the exploitative mining, that they do around, very environmentally conscious biker clubs that are out there. But on the other hand, since they're out there on the road, I think a lot of them do carry something to stay in touch with the people that they actually do care about. Even if they don't care about themselves enough to stay away from Sturgis. So, interesting story. You should read it. I just kind of was amazed that, that people would doubt that it was a super spreader event, or doubt the numbers. Not that many people have to get it from actually attending in order to spread it around. And when they go to diners and give it to other people who happen to be in the diner, people who work in the diner, whatever, hotels, etc., and it's the way pandemics work and the way germs work. They just spread like that. So I guess I was just amazed that people are still interested enough, I guess, for editors to say, yeah, let's do a piece, weeks after we all should have already known this news that says, hey, that news that you were pretty sure was the case actually is the case, except now we're talking to this one guy about it. So anyway, as I've been illustrating on every night, about when I tweet the coronavirus statistics that I read elsewhere or put together some through my own calculations based on those numbers, usually from Worldometers, and then I put that visualization together, make a map nightly of the top 10 states in terms of that day's new case counts per million population. And North Dakota, South Dakota have been on the map for months now, since, a week or so after Sturgis, and then they've never departed. And they now sit on top of the list every day. And North Dakota somehow got it worse than South Dakota out of all of this. And North Dakota now occupies a spot on top of the list, the cumulative number of cases per million. Now leading the nation, I think, has jumped ahead of Louisiana in that. So the Dakotas got killed on this. Meanwhile, the governor of South Dakota, what's her name? Christie Noem, is in New Hampshire, getting ready to lay the foundation to run for president in 2024, or maybe later or whatever. She thinks like Trump, she thinks she's done a great job, and thinks that if she just goes around saying she did a great job, then people will believe it, and that might be true among Republicans in New Hampshire. Who knows? But it's quite frustrating for the rest of us to have to watch. Here's a quick update on the story about another one. You remember the acting federal official over at the Bureau of Land Management. Acting director William Perry Pendley. And last we heard, the federal court deciding the question had said, yes, you are in fact serving illegally and you should get out of your role at the BLM. And he said, well, I'm just not gonna. And we were sort of stuck at, okay, we're finally at that who cares about the courts, how many divisions do they have question. So a little bit of movement on that, I guess. The Hill reporting this. I don't know if it's their own original reporting, but the headline: Judge tosses land management plans after ousting Pendley from role. So that's the word from Rebecca, is this Beitsch? Beitsch. You could certainly make worse pronunciations out of that, but I'm pretty sure it's probably, I got the vowel sound right on that one. Anyway, I hope so, for her sake. A federal judge unraveled the work of former Bureau of Land Management acting director William Perry Pendley, throwing out land management plans in Montana in a case that could have consequences for the agency's work elsewhere across the country. So two good things to take away from that brief paragraph, that one sentence paragraph. One, this is what judges can do with it, right? You won't leave, but what I'll do is you stay there and I will invalidate every one of your orders one by one. And then it can be a contest between, will the rest of the federal government implement your orders because of how cool and awesome you are, or will they decline to execute your orders because I, a federal judge, say they are illegal orders? And I guess, we'll see. Some will go one way, some will go the other. But another good outcome here, although, again, the outcome I'm looking for is, we'll go all the way on this one. William Perry Pendley dragged from the Bureau of Land Management offices in manacles. But we might not get that. But short of that, what can we get? We can get these sorts of things, this invalidation, and this writing things up this way. Did you notice what the author says here? A federal judge unraveled the work of former Bureau of Land Management acting director William Perry Pendley. I mean, that's important. Is he the acting director? He is not, according to both the federal judge and, importantly, the journalist writing this story up. The rest of the news here is the late Friday ruling is a win for the state of Montana, with Montana-based U.S. District Court Judge Brian Morris criticizing the Department of the Interior for, quote, novel and last-ditch legal arguments. It's the second major decision in the case after Morris last month determined Pendley had violated federal vacancy laws by serving unlawfully for 424 days through a series of temporary orders. He gave the Department of the Interior 10 days to justify why it shouldn't throw out many of the decisions Pendley has made during his tenure. So we're actually looking at going back and saying, yeah, if you've been illegally serving for 424 days, that means we have an idea of where to mark the calendar. And then from that calendar date forward, all of the things that the Bureau of Land Management did by your order are, at least conceivably, null and void. And so the judge says, well, I'll give you 10 days for your Department of Interior lawyers to justify why I shouldn't invalidate all of this stuff. I don't know whether they'll take it one at a time or do a blanket pleading that says, no, you can't do this because reasons. There might be good reasons, there might be bad reasons, but we'll wait and see what the approach is. The decision holds promise for environmental groups who have a list of at least 30 land management plans overseen by Pendley that they'd like to see reversed, many of which limit the scope of national monuments or open up significant portions of federal lands to oil and gas drilling. Pendley, a controversial figure due to his history of opposing federal ownership of public lands and also illegally serving as BLM director, remains with the agency in a deputy role after his nomination to lead the BLM was withdrawn from the Senate this summer. Interesting. Why withdraw it? And they can always resubmit it, of course, because our current Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, had that happen, right? He was up for the job, and then they withdrew the nomination because everybody found out he faked his resume, and then Trump said, to hell with it. What if I don't own the libs by nominating him again and then telling Republicans in Congress, I will say terrible things about you on Twitter and in my rallies unless you vote for this guy. And it worked. So could they make it work for this guy? Maybe. Which is why I think you need the visuals for television of him being dragged from the office in manacles. And then that just makes it that much more difficult for people to vote to confirm him. I mean, they may do it anyway, but might as well exact a price for it. Anyway, let's see. Pendley had not properly been appointed to the position and instead had exercised authority as acting BLM director through a series of unlawful delegations. Morris wrote in reference to the maneuvers that kept him in the acting director role for over a year, any exclusive function of the BLM performed by Pendley is invalid. Morris's decision invalidates 3 land management plans Pendley supervised in Montana, including one that would open 95% of 650,000 acres of BLM land to resource extraction like mining and drilling. But he stopped short of applying the ruling to any of Pendley's other decisions, despite devoting much of the decision to castigating Interior for failing to comply with his order to supply a list of actions that he may have taken illegally. That's one way around it, right? I think all of your decisions since this date forward must have been illegal. Now supply me with a list of those actions and I will invalidate them one by one. And the Department of Interior says, what if I don't give them a list? And I guess that's a problem. Should be able to get that list somewhere. Despite federal defendants' disagreement with the exercise and apparent refusal to engage in a search in good faith, it remains probable that additional actions taken by Pendley that should be set aside as unlawful. That didn't make a whole lot of grammatical sense. I might have missed something, but I think we get the idea. Interior had argued that Pendley took no relevant acts within the director's exclusive authority. Then why are we paying him? I don't know. Maybe we can get to that next. Get the money back. That would be a nice thing too. Manacles and unstuff the guy's mattress. That's the visual I'm looking for. Okay. So let's see. We're coming up on our next break here, and we'll move on from there, round up some of the other weird, wild weekend stories. There are plenty, of course. Another follow-up, this time maybe from Stat News. We'll take a peek in there. Another follow-up story on the community outbreaks of COVID-19, which often emerge after Trump's campaign rallies. Another sort of duh story. Again, have a mass event, you will have a mass number of positives. Whoa. The music goes all the way up there, but I think we can recover this time. Gradually bringing it back down. Very sensitive magic mouse today. All right, well, we'll check in on that story and, how many others? We'll see what else we can fit in the last half-hour segment. Talk to you then. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So many stories we could be bringing you, and lots of ideas for more evergreen stories that we might have to pack into some pre-recorded shows coming up at the end of next week. So early announcement of housekeeping items. Gonna have to work something out with Ian, who usually visits on Fridays. This Friday will be fine. Next Friday, what a time for it! I have some another round of relatively minor surgery happening next Thursday, and in all likelihood next morning, Friday. Not a great time to do a show, but not a great time to skip a show either. So I'm really not sure what's going to happen, but there's plenty of evergreen stories we can share. Also, of course, heading into the final weekend before Election Day. Well, most of you will already have voted, and that's good news. But those of you who have already voted will be out, hopefully, in search of those who have not, doing Get Out the Vote weekend. And you can't be sitting around listening to my podcast unless, of course, you are listening to it on headphones from your or earbuds from your phone while you're walking and dropping literature. I don't know. Anyway, we'll see what happens when we get around to that. But in particular, I want to check in with Ian about what we're going to do, because our deal was, and we may extend that deal. We'll see. The door's open to do it if you'd like. But academic year sort of cranking up at this point, and it's getting to be at a critical moment. We were going to be visiting with him on Fridays through the election. And I don't want to miss the last one. But, surgery being what it is, you kind of have to take care of it when it happens. So anyway, nothing major, no major emergencies, no major health threats that anyone needs to worry about. Just bad timing and poor scheduling. Anyway, we'll update you more on that as we get closer. A couple other stories, though, that we might want to try and squeeze in and share. Several coronavirus stories, of course. We'll check in on that Stat News one, just to see if there's any fun details about particular events. I really would like to see somebody following much more closely, perhaps with a chart accompanying their article. Where has the president stopped and who's sick in the wake of that? Because we all got distracted by the president falling ill from this thing. By the way, this is something we can discuss perhaps with Greg. I thought I had seen somewhere discussed the possibility, and I don't think anybody has written it up yet, but I saw it discussed as a possibility on Twitter, that this rather novel new emergency treatment that Trump got, the instant miracle cure that he's going to give to everybody for free, and he promised, I think, some 11 days ago, and has given to virtually no one except, I guess, Christie. He managed to bail him out of the hospital. He's one of the stories sitting in pocket here as well. barnstorming around the country, making people sick. I'd like to know how many people there were at each of these events and whether they are tracing all of this and can attribute it. But I guess people are reluctant to A, to get tested, and B, to report where they think they got sick if it'll make their president look, their favorite guy, look bad, or friends or relatives look bad. Anyway, community outbreaks of COVID-19 often emerge after Trump's campaign rallies. Headlines this story by Zach Nair in Stat News. We've been back and forth to Stat News a couple of times. He starts out this way. In mid-May, I sat in the backyard of my family's home, garbed in graduation regalia, and via Zoom joined my medical school classmates to read these words of the Hippocratic Oath, that into whatsoever house I shall enter, it shall be for the good of the sick. So now we hear a little bit of the oath. That's nice. When President Trump held a mass campaign rally in Newport News, where I now work, at the end of September, that's, of course, down in the Hampton Roads area, southeastern corner of Virginia, right on the coast there. When he held this rally in Newport News, where he now works, at the end of September, he did so against the explicit warning of local health officials. He was entering this community, our house, not for the good of the sick, but to promote himself. The gathering may have brought sickness to the community. As a new physician, I find that deeply disturbing. As the death toll of COVID-19 heads towards 220,000 in the United States alone, and this date on this piece was October 16th, and he's using the more conservative number, probably the Johns Hopkins number, our world meters number, very rapidly approaching 225,000. We'll certainly go over the top of that sometime today, even after, we have to catch up for the weekend lag. Right, so as it heads towards 220,000 in the U.S. alone, more deaths than in any other country in the world, the president, who is currently convalescing from COVID-19 himself, has spent the past several months crisscrossing a pandemic-ravaged country in his bid for re-election. And it now occurs to me, hey, I didn't finish that sentence before, right? I had heard mentioned on Twitter that because of the weird treatment that he had gotten, that was that he was infused with the monoclonal antibodies, that it may not have, it may have left him without the natural antibodies that someone who fights off the infection in the natural way might develop. And so his claims of now being immune to the virus, they were never very smart and never scientifically based in the first place. But, and even if you recover from coronavirus, quote unquote, naturally, there are some questions about how long the immunity, if any, actually lasts, now that we're getting information about people being reinfected and even people being reinfected and dying from coronavirus the second time around. The numbers I have, gleaned just from skimming the discussion of it on Twitter was that it looked like people were saying that about 4 months or so, perhaps, of immunity might be available to those who develop natural antibodies in the course of their recovery from the infection, but that Trump, having taken this shortcut artificial route, might not have those antibodies at all. It might not even have that 4-month short-term immunity. And of course, now that he's wearing himself out and traveling around to various super spreader events unmasked, there's every possibility that if that's true, he could contract the virus again, which I think would just seal it in terms of the election. And who knows whether they can cure you twice with this instant miracle cure or not, or whether whether his constitution can take being on heavy doses of super steroids twice in a month. We'll find out. Maybe. If we're lucky. I can say that now. I'm free to say, I hope he gets it again. Sure. Fantastic. Why not? No one deserves it more. All right. So where were we with this? Yes. So he comes to Newport News, and it's a bad idea. And he's spent the last several months crisscrossing a pandemic-ravaged country. The crowds he draws are fertile breeding grounds for transmission of SARS-CoV-2. You know what that is. It's the virus. And the president has repeatedly held these gatherings, not only in defiance of public health guidelines, but seemingly to spite them, downplaying the threat of the virus eschewing basic public health principles such as wearing face coverings and packing his supporters shoulder to shoulder for political optics. Several early campaign events were indoors, such as in Tulsa, where there was a reported surge in cases afterwards. Of course, Herman Cain, who was co-chair of Black Voices for Trump and who attended the rally without wearing a mask, tested positive 2 days after the rally and died less than 2 weeks later. Yeah, I don't think it was that quick, actually. Now, my recollection was it was 40 days from attending the event to dying. Not 2 weeks is 14, not 40. Anyway, earlier this year, my colleague, Usnish Majumdar, I think that's pretty close, joined a different kind of mass gatherings, a Black Lives Matter protest in the streets of New York City, with thousands of people. Now, in stark contrast to the behavior encouraged at Trump's rallies, of course, protesters not only wore masks, but often carried extra face coverings for themselves and others. These good faith attempts to adhere to public health guidelines paid off. No surge in COVID-19 cases was observed following these protests. Concerned about the impact of Trump's campaign rallies, Majumdar and I compiled county-based data of new coronavirus cases from each of his general election campaign rallies between Tulsa in late June and Newport News in late September. We looked at case numbers for the 14 days before and after each event to see if any patterns of community outbreaks emerged. We chose 14 days to consider the longest incubation periods, given the median onset from exposure to time of symptoms for COVID-19 is about 3 to 5 days. You know the facts about that. This may be an imperfect measurement, to be sure. That's the to be sure sentence. Some rally goers travel to these events from other counties and go back home afterward, like Sturgis, possibly contributing to community outbreaks elsewhere. And community outbreaks may, of course, be due to other events. Correlation, of course, does not equal causation, but these data offer a metric to quantify the damage from a public health hazard. Any signal of community spread would likely originate closer to the epicenter of these events. What we found was sobering, yet not surprising. Spikes in COVID-19 cases occurred in 7 of the 14 cities and townships where these rallies were held. It's only half, but it is of some interest. Tulsa, Phoenix, Old Forge, Pennsylvania. Here's something. In Minnesota. How do you pronounce this one? Bemidji. Probably at the time, maybe you heard it on the news. Maybe you live there. Bemidji? Anyway, in Minnesota, Mankato, Minnesota. Maybe I got that wrong too. Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and Weston, Wisconsin. Very interesting. And there's a little chart that shows you all the spikes. You can see it for yourself when you read through this. Now, less than 2 weeks after his COVID-19 diagnosis, the president is again holding large campaign rallies. That's a mistake if he cares about the health of his constituents, the well-being of our communities, and frontline healthcare workers. He doesn't. He should instead suspend campaign activities that promote transmission of COVID-19. That's good advice. He should listen to doctors, the same professionals who treated him when he fell ill, urging him not to endanger the public health. That's true, right? That's interesting. He took the doctor's advice on how to get you better from coronavirus. Wow, doctors, you're geniuses. I'm not going to listen to you ever again. All right. It's a decision you can make, but you shouldn't be president if you make those sorts of decisions. Campaigning in a safe and responsible fashion is possible. Former Vice President Joe Biden has held small-scale events with masking and social distancing requirements strictly enforced and is leaning heavily on virtual events. He was ridiculed by the president for his mask wearing and modest event attendance, sometimes in purposefully near empty rooms, as a source of weakness. As a healthcare professional, however, I see this commitment to safety as a display of compassion and strength. Well, it doesn't work with Trump fans, but okay. While it's too early to tell if there will be a surge in cases in Newport News, I worry that some of my patients might suffer collateral damage from attending a reckless campaign event. When the president promotes maskless mass gatherings during a pandemic, I worry that some of my patients might emulate this behavior, putting their lives and the lives of those around them at risk. How do I explain the terrible irony to my COVID-19 patients that we allow the president to put on gatherings of thousands of people in our communities, yet they must die alone without the comfort of their own families? It's a good question, and I know it's been on a lot of minds. A lot of you have already asked this question and probably come to the same conclusion that he did too, but it's nice to know that at least he's putting out a data-based study on this thing, and we might get some actual numbers and figures in the days to come. All right, let's see. Other things that we can shoehorn in here. One more that's directly coronavirus related I will borrow from Mark Sumner on the front page at Daily Kos from Friday, just to follow up on, because I mentioned Christie. Title of the piece: After days in the ICU, Christie says he was wrong about COVID-19, but he needs to do more than talk. It's interesting. I saw the story passed around on Twitter with other comments, very relevant. Generally speaking, the one that struck me, I think, was, once again, the Republican pattern at work here again. He doesn't take something seriously, doesn't believe in it, doesn't see the value in thinking about it unless and until it happens to him personally. Then, oh my goodness, I've been wrong the whole time. I may have killed thousands of you being wrong, but now I'm sorry. You're dead, but I'm sorry about it. I mean, it's better than nothing, I guess. What do you get if you take people who enjoy how white privilege gives them advantages in society, how male privilege lets men dictate the lives of women, and how social privilege buffers the wealthy from economic misfortunes that beset millions of Americans? The answer, I guess, in that stew is the Republican Party is what you get when you mix those things. And at the top of the Republican Party is a reliable layer of wealth, white males whose privilege on top of privilege on top of privilege has left them so isolated that their empathy muscles have atrophied away to dust. Take Chris Christie, please. In addition to being the man who famously thought it would be hilarious to punish thousands of commuters to demonstrate his power over a local mayor, the most recent appearance of Christie in the news came following questions over whether he encouraged Donald Trump to try and make Joe Biden stutter. Then he got sick. Now, after spending a solid week in the ICU, Christie has been gifted an epiphany. COVID-19 is bad. It might seem that having 220,000 Americans die, including 16,300 in New Jersey, would be enough of a signal that COVID-19 was serious business and every step should be taken to avoid catching it or spreading it to others. But there's that empathy problem again. For guys like Christie, it's not an issue until it happens to them. So, on September 26th, as Trump was rolling out Amy Coney Barrett to a super spreader event featuring over 100 Republican stars, and that's in scare quotes, Christie was right there, walking around without a mask, shaking hands, getting in people's faces, and sucking down coronavirus. Inside and outside on that day, Christie seemed to operate with the same general disdain for the disease that Trump and his followers have demonstrated both before and after that day. That was, as Christie now admits, a bad idea. In a statement to the New York Times, Christie wrote, "I was wrong. I was wrong not to wear a mask at the Amy Coney Barrett announcement. And I was wrong not to wear a mask at my multiple debate prep sessions with the president and the rest of the team." And Christie goes on to write, "I hope that my experience shows my fellow citizens that you should follow CDC guidelines in public, no matter where you are, and wear a mask to protect yourself and others." They should throw him down a well. It would be nice if part of his next debate prep for Trump included having him repeat that message, because on Thursday night, that was last Thursday, Trump once again refused to say that he had been wrong about not insisting on masks and explained, and I should put that in scare quotes, but it isn't. He says explained that, quote, 85% of people who wear masks catch coronavirus. That was one of his most amazing misstatements, lies, what have you. I still am unclear. I would love to know what was it that put 85 in his head. I want to know how far he departed from what he actually read to come up with this nonsense. When NBC host Savannah Guthrie attempted to correct him, Trump steamed on, saying, "That's what I heard. That's what I saw." Which, again, should just have been more ammunition for Guthrie at that point. She was at first very strong. I recall hearing her say, "That's not right. I saw the study that you're referring to. That's not what it says." Well, that's what I heard. That's what I saw. I mean, the follow up to that is, what are you, 5? What's wrong with you? I just told you that wasn't what you saw, and it wasn't what you heard. You're lying again. You're lying about the 85%. I read the study, and then you said, well, that's what I saw. No, it isn't what you saw. You know why you didn't see it? Because nobody said it. Nobody wrote it. Nobody thought it. It didn't happen. You're making it up. You either misunderstood wildly, like so badly that you're too stupid to be president, starting now, or you're lying. I don't care which one it is. You shouldn't be here. And of course, the thing to do at that point is forget it. The town hall over. You're talking to a moron. No more town hall. Go watch cartoons. You'll come out smarter. But, she was getting paid, so she didn't do that. And she's a professional journalist. Blah, blah, blah. So again, I don't know. The pushback was there, but it really deserved to be more. I don't know. This weekend I saw a clip from an interview down in New Zealand, which is much in the news lately, as they are pretty much COVID free now. I think they were freaking out because they had one case the other day. The first time in 3 weeks they had one case, and they're actually taking some action. But the prime minister down there apparently recently reelected with an actual Labour Party majority, which I guess they've never actually had or at least not recently, in New Zealand politics. And so I happened to see a story this morning that I thought was also kind of interesting, and it might deserve some time at some point. A glowing profile of the prime minister there, Jacinda Ardern. I remember the Jacinda as her first name. The accents there are fantastic. So I loved watching the news. It wasn't her being interviewed. It was a right-wing politician there who was being grilled by the anchor there about, why did we've just had this tremendous success against coronavirus by being sensible and science-based here in New Zealand. Do you regret being such an idiot demagogue? Is essentially what she asked, and she might as well have asked it that way. And the guy, he's very polished, and in his fantastic New Zealand accent explains, no, I wasn't doing. There are many questions, or as they say, questions, that we should have asked about COVID-19, and it's a novel coronavirus, and we didn't know much about it, and we pushed back, and for instance, we don't know that. And she's unrelenting and just says, no, we know what happened. I mean, where they did the dumb stuff that you're saying in places like the United States, they're dying by the thousands and still dying by the thousands. And here, we did the opposite of everything you and the other idiots around the world, the Anglosphere anyway, that we can discern, did about coronavirus. And we won. We beat the thing. Well, granted, we're a remote island nation, but I mean, good. Take advantage of that. And we beat it. And why are you such a moron? I'm not a moron. Well, actually, in point of fact, sir, you are a moron. It was very sharp questioning. It wasn't quite like that, but I recommend that you take a look. I guess, note to self, I'll have to go find that thing. But it was really nice. And anyway, it's nice to see Jacinda Ardern getting the kudos that she deserves for doing this. In this one CNN profile I saw of her, just sort of explaining to everybody that she won this tremendous victory and based on simple competence in responding to the coronavirus. But she apparently has a very interesting and inspiring backstory as well. So I'll just whet your appetite for it and hand it over to you to read. The small town takeout store worker who won over New Zealand and the world. I guess she's 40 years old now. Apparently, as they say here, one of the world's most recognizable leaders, and I think she's gotten a lot of publicity. But apparently not that long ago, she was working behind the counter at a takeout seafood restaurant. So kind of cool. I don't know whether it's a fair thing to say that it has anything at all to do with the appeal that, say, AOC has had in moving from bartender to elected congresswoman, but probably the comparison is stupid and facile, but if you can read this thing and find out for me, let me know. I'll try and read it too, see whether there's any actual depth to it, but just for sort of interesting. And lo and behold, the Labour Party actually flourishes and its ideas win a majority in New Zealand when an actual Labourer runs for office on that ticket. Seems like a pretty good combination, maybe a good idea, something we should try. Okay, anyway, getting back to Christie and how evil and stupid he is. Right, it would be nice if he actually prepared Trump for the debate on the idea of empathy, despite the fact that, as he sits there and says, well, I lied about the number of people who get coronavirus after wearing a mask, but that's what I heard, and they really should have thrown him off at that point. Actually, maybe Mark knows, the 85% survey comes from a questionnaire in which patients who have contracted COVID-19 were asked about their habits, and maybe lied. And 85%, here's the number, said that they always or usually wore a mask in social distancing situations. But then, what are they going to say? Any other box on the form might as well be labeled, nope, I got this disease through my own foolishness or by following the example set by Donald Trump. Nobody's going to check that box. How effective is wearing a mask in real life? Winding back the clock to early summer, Arizona Governor Doug Ducey enthusiastically threw off social distancing guidelines and became one of the most vocal supporters of Trump's calls to reopen everything. When cities and counties in his state issued mask mandates, Ducey even issued an order blocking all such regulations, which is how by early June, Arizona sailed to the top of the charts on new COVID-19 cases. As hospitals filled and death rates raced up, local officials begged Ducey to relent. Finally, on June 18th, after weeks of refusing to issue a mandate, Ducey relented and allowed local authorities to create mandates in their areas, which they did. So how's that going? As Arizona Central reports, the rate of COVID-19 zoomed up after Ducey removed restrictions at the end of May. But for those areas that implemented mask mandates afterwards, new cases of COVID-19 have fallen 75% in the following 6 weeks. That number is almost perfectly in line with what the experts have predicted if there was general mandates to wear masks. Christie, who received both first-rate care and yet another of those experimental monoclonal antibody cocktails unavailable to normal COVID-19 patients. I think we're up to 7,900 who have died since the president said he was going to immediately give it to all of them. Christie now feeling better. But if he wants to show that he's actually grown a heart, at least one Grinch size larger, he needs to convince Trump to issue a national mask mandate. And then a update here. Christie released a statement on Friday saying, no matter what you're doing, you should have a mask on and you should try to remain socially distant from folks. I did it for 7 months and I stayed healthy. I didn't do it for 4 days and I wound up in the ICU. So kind of the opposite of the 85% number as Trump would have it. And there's an object lesson in that right there. Of course, he won't actually state this lesson, but it's implicit in here. I did it for 7 months and stayed healthy. But then, when I had to work with Trump, I was afraid that he would make fun of me. I was afraid that he would yell at me. I was afraid that he wouldn't let me prep him for the debate. I was afraid that he would not make me an important person in the orbit of the President of the United States. And I was willing to effing kill myself to avoid that. Remember, he's got pre-existing conditions. Most of you know what at least one of those pre-existing conditions is. It's quite obvious. He's been working on it, but it's still quite obvious. But he also apparently suffers from a history of asthma, which will effing kill you if you have COVID. And he said, you know what? I don't want to get thrown out. I don't want people to find out that the president didn't think I was the important enough guy to prep him for this important event. It's worth my death to do this. And he almost got his wish. But the monoclonal antibody experimental drugs came in at the last minute. And I guess, I'm sure he's thinking, thank God it did, because he came this close to dying without it. Donald Trump, not exactly on the ball for some strange reason in delivering the instant miracle cure to the people who had willingly sacrificed their lives, or at least put their lives on the sacrificial altar to prep him for the debate. How petty is Trump? It may just be the fact that I sucked at the debate. So I'm going to kill my debate prep team. That would have been an awesome outcome. But, hey, he nearly got it. But I don't know. He had a twinge of conscience or something. Maybe Christie was able to order it himself somehow. I got no idea how it got into his hands, but it did. And I guess we'll know whether in a couple of days, whether he preps Trump for the third, well, now second debate, the final debate, if that even happens at this point. But I don't know. Amazing that he thinks he's making up for it by admitting he was wrong, but there's a lot more admission still needs to come before I'm satisfied with it. In the meantime, the name remains on the list. Thank God we've got that long stretch of border wall against which we can line all these idiots up if you keep track of their names between now and the critical time. All right, much more to discuss in the coming days. We'll be back tomorrow. See if Joan McCarter can join us. It's a busy time, but hopefully we can check in with her, find out what's going on, hear about things from her perspective. And then, of course, today, for the rest of the programming day here on Netroots Radio, we'll start out with Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Coming up next, as soon as we're done with this announcement and my blurting out more about what he's got in store for you.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning.
With David Waldman.
North Dakota in the news. Guess what? Voters want their Republican governor to take a more aggressive attack against the virus. Elsewhere, black officers nationwide break with the police union's endorsements of Trump, and an Indiana police recruit fired for ties to neo-Nazis raises troubling questions about departments across the country. I bet I know what those questions are. Next.